Hi, I'm Nadine, and I've been sober for 3 years. So, when I started my journey alcohol free, it was through the aid of my therapist, just counseling me and asking me to moderate my drinking. Quickly, I soon realized that moderation was not possible for me. So, there were some days when I could actually go out and drink and stick to my set limit of, say, like 2 or 3 drinks per night. But when I tell you the mental gymnastics behind doing that was so frustrating, it was never fun for me. I would mirror other people's drinking patterns, trying to be like a normie or a normal drinker. And it was actually more disheartening because I realized that I was not enjoying moderate drinking. My initial reaction when my therapist asked me to define my relationship with alcohol was actually quite surprising, considering when I started my journey in therapy, it was for issues that I believed at the time to be unrelated to alcohol. I was going through a breakup, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I really just wanted a sound voice to talk to give me feedback about how to improve my life altogether. But through several sessions with my therapist, she kept asking me that same question: how would you define your relationship with alcohol? And then it struck me, I have a problem with alcohol. And so once I accepted the fact that maybe my relationship with alcohol was not the healthiest, I began to strive for a change. But that change was not sobriety, or so I thought. Like for me, it was just about how can I control my drinking? But the thing about it, Tiana, is control is an illusion. And when you have a true issue with alcohol, I consider myself to be an alcoholic, there is no controlling the disease. And so when I would report back to my therapist how, these moderation sessions were going, she encouraged me to maybe just take a break from alcohol altogether. And that's what really prompted my sober journey. Alcoholism falls on the alcohol use spectrum, and I consider it to be a disorder. Science says that it is a disorder. But what's unique about it is it's often something that individuals have to self-diagnose. And so there's the good part of that is that you can see where you fall on the alcohol use spectrum. So some people are gray area drinkers, meaning maybe they binge on weekends and then they're not drinking, say, Monday through Thursday or something like that. And then there are people who, have more of a healthy relationship with alcohol. But alcoholism for me doesn't look the way that I think the media portrays it, like brown paper bag, losing your wife and kids. Like none of that happened to me, but I definitely experienced some rock bottoms, which I'm happy to share. But essentially, I consider myself to be an alcoholic because I would rather tell myself that I'm an alcoholic. Remember, it's more self-diagnosed, than delude myself into believing that I don't have an issue with alcohol. Because from the first sip of alcohol at age 13, I've never wanted just one cup or one glass of wine. I've always wanted and craved more and more of it. And so for me, it's just easier to completely abstain. For me, some of the challenges that I faced leading up to sobriety. So my sobriversary date for folks at home is July 5th, 2021. So like we were still kind of in the pandemic, but we were edging our way towards like a normal society, whatever that looks like. So essentially in the pandemic, my drinking, like so many others, was exasperated. Being at home at the time, actually, I lived in Mexico City, so I had moved abroad. I was in a completely different setting. But here's the thing, you can't escape yourself. So I was trying to run from something. That's actually what led me to therapy. I was trying to get away from social circles and my ex and things like that. But essentially, I was left with myself. And I realized in the pandemic that my drinking it went from, I'm a social drinker. So I party with friends and drink. And another thing is when I would drink, it would open the gates for me to experiment with other things and substances like drugs. So the baseline was the alcohol that was really driving a lot of careless, reckless decision making on my part. And so the pandemic, though, I found being at home more, I was drinking on a daily basis. And going back to the alcohol use disorder spectrum, I went from maybe a gray area drinker to a daily drinker. And that was scary for me. But still, because it was the pandemic, it felt like there was a sense of normalcy. When I would go on social media, you see all these other people creating content around, oh, we're basically functioning alcoholics. Ha ha ha. Isn't this funny? It's the pandemic's fault. edging out of the pandemic, once again, going back to July 2021, my soberversary, life was resuming, society was flowing again, and here I was still leaning on alcohol as a support. And so some of the challenges around getting sober was really truly myself, like not getting in my own way. When I went from moderating or trying to moderate alcohol to fully deciding to be sober, the sober piece for me, it was too daunting to say that I was going to give up alcohol forever. So I treated it like a social experiment. I was like, okay, I'm going to do a month or two not drinking because I'm sick of trying to moderate, failing sometimes, succeeding other times, but still feeling shameful of the fact that I wanted to drink more. So I decided to just take a break altogether. I went on this trip with two of my girlfriends who weren't big drinkers, and we basically went to several countries in Europe. It was an amazing trip, but it got me out of my comfort zone, which was important for me, like getting out of my daily routine. They say people, places, things, like those were triggering for me. So getting out of New York essentially and moving into a new normal or a new routine, even though it was me traveling, was really helpful for me to like stick with sobriety. And then when I came back, I just felt so much better from abstaining from alcohol that I was like, wait, why would I ever want to go back? My soberversary date being July 5th definitely meant that July 4th, holiday weekend, Independence Day, I was off the rails. Like that was like a pebble bottom. Like I like to reference, it wasn't a full rock bottom, but it was definitely a pebble bottom in the sense that prior to that weekend, I had had about a month of sobriety under my belt. Once again, wasn't really calling it sobriety, but I hadn't drunk or done drugs or anything like that. So I was feeling really proud of myself. The issue was that before this moment, I had pre-booked a trip with a girlfriend to, of all places in the world, Atlantic City. And if anyone doesn't know anything about Atlantic City, it's not the best place to go if you're newly sober. So we had planned this trip. We get to the casino/hotel. It felt like I was walking into a time capsule. Like it just felt like I'm in the 1980s. Where are the drugs? Where are the drinks? Like that vibe. And so within, I would say like an hour of me landing in Atlantic City, I was drinking, I was drugging, I was basically right back in the swing of things, even though I had experienced a month of sober time. And I felt good going into that trip, but like just the environment was catered for me to want to be in a place to drink and use. And so I did that. So coming down from that weekend, July 5th being my soberversary date, I was ashamed of myself. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I think going into that next therapy session, I was already thinking to myself, wow, I have to self-report this to my therapist. What is she going to think? But also, Tiana, it's like not about what other people think. It's like, how do you feel? What do you think about yourself? And I was not feeling good about myself. And I felt like I had made a promise to myself that I couldn't keep. And that's when I knew I had to relinquish control, in the sense that like maybe this thing is bigger than me and maybe I need to take more proactive steps to maintaining sobriety. So my community or my village reacted to my newfound sobriety. It was a split camp, if I'm being honest. So on one hand, I had people that I think were in denial that A, they thought that I had a true problem with alcohol. I'll get to that later. And then B, I think people that were just in denial in the sense that they didn't want to support my sobriety. So that was like one half of the people in denial, versus the other side of my community very much embraced my decision. They thought, wow, why wouldn't you want to do this? That sounds great. I think the way I presented it to people though was like, I'm taking a break for health reasons. I want to be snatched at summertime, like all the things, right? So people really leaned into that and were like, yeah, like my family especially were like, I think that's good, because they didn't understand the depth of my drinking, but I think they realized that, okay, Nadine loves to drink and she probably drinks too much, but it was never like an outward conversation that we had. It was just sort of like implied that Nadine's a drinker. So family was very much on board. But in terms of friends, I felt at the time some resentment forming, because the people that, going back to the A denial group, that were just like, you don't have a drinking problem, so why would you stop drinking? Like that group of people, I realize now, 3 years later, that they didn't want me to have a problem with alcohol because it forced them to hold a mirror up to themselves and maybe recognize that their drinking was also problematic because, those are my drinking buddies. Like we'd be doing the same things essentially. So I think that helped me forgive certain people who were unsupportive in that regard. And then B, the people that were just like, oh, why are you not drinking? Like that's dumb, essentially. The people that were just unsupportive for the sake of being unsupportive, I cut them out, like black and white in that regard. Like once I set boundaries and made it clear that this is not, just a little thing that I'm doing for the sake of it's summer, once I decided that this is something that I'm really embodying and following, if they weren't for me or with me, then they had to get cut. I'm sorry. So it very much for me became a situation where just sort of like the trash takes itself out. There are people that I realized in getting sober, like you have so much clarity that just were not really for me. And that's okay. And it wasn't always like an explicit, like we have to sit down and have a conversation. I'm ending this relationship. It's just like people stop inviting you to things and people stop supporting you and showing up for you. And that's fine. So like those relationships essentially ran its course, and I am happy because I still have my day ones with me, and the people that were sort of maybe just considered party friends are no longer with me, and that's okay. How has my overall well-being improved since starting my sober journey? It has completely transcended my life in every aspect of health and well-being. Mental health, I would say, is the forefront of the impact that sobriety has given me, where I just feel like I have more clarity. I'm an Aries. I make very impulsive decisions. So you can imagine me drunk or on substances, it would just be that times 10. So I think for me, like having a clear state of mind at all times helps me make more rational, logical decisions. I know everyone says they're undiagnosed ADHD, but I really do think I have ADHD. So I think like it helps quiet my mind more. I'm able to focus and hone in. There is no anxiety. So after drinking, I would always, I think, be the brunt of people's jokes. I would always be the person doing the wild and crazy things. So I'd have to live with that the next day and just like sit with that. And now I don't. So I feel like that has helped with interpersonal relationships. That's helped me, really strengthen my core relationships. That whereas before I felt like I was always like in apology mode, always trying to make up for things I did when I was drunk. From a physical standpoint, I've always been really into wellness and fitness and things like that. But it's interesting, the oxymoron between being like a health nut, somebody obsessed with their health and optimizing it, but also drinking poison on a regular basis. So now I'm seeing the full like extent of what sobriety can do for your physical health. I feel better. I'm able to put more into my workouts and receive more on the, on the opposite end. Whereas before, I'm just such a like go person. I would still force myself to work out even if I was hungover, almost like punishment. And now I don't have to do that. Like I can show up and be my best self and feel good as well. So the physical, mental health, and even like beauty, I know beauty is very superficial. Like I do feel more beautiful. I feel like my skin is clearer. I just feel like I exude more confidence, and it really has completely transformed every fiber of my being. I do think that the self-diagnosed ADHD thing, I genuinely believe, I've done some research, and there's actually a lot of links between people who are considered alcoholics and ADHD, which is interesting. Like maybe we're just like not neurotypical in many ways, but essentially I know that my attention span is not where it probably should be. It could be a symptom of the times, being a millennial girly, but I definitely think that I have ADHD. I just would rather not take medication because I would abuse ADHD medication in college before I, needed it, or definitely didn't need it then. But like in general, it's a slippery slope for me. So I'd rather not dabble with medication if I can help it. Alcohol definitely served as a coping mechanism. I started drinking for social reasons. I think, like most people, it serves as a social lubricant. It loosens you up, it makes you feel less inhibited, so on and so forth. But then it's easy to shift gears and or abuse alcohol for other reasons. And so for me, it definitely became a crutch. Dealing with bad breakups. My father unfortunately passed when I was in college unexpectedly. And that was, I think, a pivotal moment in my drinking trajectory, because that served as the first point in time when I started to drink in secrecy, when I started to drink alone, isolated, when I drank as a reprieve as opposed to as a social condition. And that pervaded throughout my 20s. I stopped drinking at age 30. So my 30s, thankfully have been unencumbered by alcohol, but essentially it would oscillate. So back to the alcohol use spectrum, at various points in my drinking career, I would be more of a social drinker. And then there were times when things were dark, alcohol reflected and mirrored what was going on internally with me. So I would drink more if I felt alone. I would drink more if I felt sad. I would drink to, grieve and process emotions. I would drink, and then funny enough, my drinking, the way I would act when I was drunk would somehow unleash the feelings that I was trying to suppress. So a lot of people would say that Nadine was an angry drunk, which if you know me in real life, I'm like not an angry person. Like I'm very like happy-go-lucky, but yeah, I was able to reach into emotions that I was suppressing when I was drinking. And so there was something cathartic about that. Like I didn't realize at the time that maybe I was trying to feel because I was so used to suppressing my emotions and didn't want to deal with anything painful. So drinking was a way for me to do that. But when I removed the alcohol, I was left to, deal with my own issues, my own feelings. And that has been a very like liberating process for me that's required many tools, but essentially has been, I think, the best way, because I wasn't processing anything before. I was just sort of like quelling and subduing any feelings I didn't want to feel. So how I plan on continuing to evolve and grow in my sober life is just how you mentioned. It's kind of embedded in the question. Like I strive to continue to evolve, period, in all aspects of my life. But I don't have alcohol hindering me. I don't have substances anchoring me. I think in doing like if I do the math, half of my life almost has been spent tethered to a substance. Like in high school, drinking, smoking, college, drinking, smoking, my 20s, drinking, smoking, party drugs. Like just this is the first time in my life where I have felt free, like truly free. And it is a feeling that you cannot sell. It's a feeling that you can't buy. It is just a being. It's like in my DNA now. Like I just know that life moving forward has so much possibility because I'm no longer trying to get my next high or my next whatever. Like I have everything I need essentially, which is so beautiful and, as mentioned, liberating for me. So I think in general, just my sober journey has just begun. I'm 3 years in. I plan on, God willing, staying sober for the rest of my life. I have no aspirations, no delusions. I'm not romanticizing drinking or using again, because I know that I know what my life can look like when I am not using or drinking, and I don't ever want my life to go back to where it was before. So in all aspects of my life, I strive to grow, and sobriety is just helping me get to that place a little bit faster, I would say. I do think that, like I said, I self-diagnosed myself as an alcoholic. I do think that the alcoholic brain, I'm air quoting that because that's terminology that comes from recovery programs like AA, but the alcoholic brain essentially sometimes tries to trick you. And I don't ever want to get too cocky with my sobriety, right? Like at this stage in the game, I'm able to be around people who are drinking, people who are using. I can go to bars, clubs, parties. I actually enjoy that. But I also know what my threshold is. And anytime I start to feel uncomfortable, I know it's time to start heading out. Like it's never going to be worth me compromising all of the growth and progress that I've made. So I just feel good in my sobriety, but I'm not cocky. I think the one thing I would say to people, especially if they are drinking, listen to that inner voice. Like if you feel that there's a tug, not to make this, about religion or anything like that, but I believe in God. And there's an expression I like to quote, which is first God whispers and then he screams. And so I think before my therapist even said to me, you know, how do you define your relationship with alcohol? Before she held a mirror up to myself, I already knew the answer. Like I heard the whispers, like I felt the tug. And so if you are thinking or worried that alcohol is playing maybe too big a role in your life, treat it like a social experiment. You don't have to go to the extreme measure like me and some of your other guests who are like, we never want to drink, although it is better on the side of life, I promise. However, I would tell people just to like give yourself grace and give yourself a little bit of room to see how you feel, take inventory, collect the data, and then decide, right? Like you don't have to make this big life altering change to get sober. But I would say anyone and everyone can benefit from taking a break from alcohol.